Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! My obsession with detailed record keeping ended up costing someone their job. After a nightmare experience at my previous company, where I got burned by poor documentation during an HR dispute, I became meticulous about keeping records of everything. Every email, every conversation, every meeting got documented. My reputation for thorough record keeping preceded me at this new company 3 years ago. That's exactly why my boss chose me to be secretary for our monthly improvement team meetings. The improvement team was supposed to meet once a month to discuss company issues and brainstorm solutions. Sounds good on paper, right? Our department was full of dedicated people who genuinely cared about doing good work. I'd even won an employee award the year before for going above and beyond my regular duties. But despite all our efforts, we kept getting customer complaints and dealing with serious safety issues that were completely out of our control. The problem started when we tried to bring these concerns to our boss. I'd send detailed emails about safety hazards or procedural issues that were causing customer complaints, and they'd just sit in her inbox unread. When we tried to discuss things in person, she'd roll her eyes and dismiss us by calling us whiny and needy and telling us to just deal with it. It didn't matter what the issue was. Customers stealing items from our workspace. She'd blame us for not watching them closely enough, people complaining about the confusing procedures she'd implemented. She'd say we weren't explaining things well enough, safety equipment that was broken or missing. She'd claim we should have been more careful with it. When we reached out to other departments for support, we got nowhere. Our boss was all smiles and sunshine with them, so they couldn't believe she was treating us poorly. They'd ask if we were being overly sensitive and say she'd always been really nice to them. This went on for months. Every meeting, we'd bring up the same unresolved issues. Every meeting, she'd brush us off or blame us for problems that were clearly systemic. I kept taking my usual bullet point notes, documenting everything as secretary, but nothing was changing. Then came the meeting at the end of the fiscal year. I walked into that conference room feeling frustrated but determined. A couple of my teammates felt the same way. We decided we weren't going to let her dismiss us again. I brought up the safety issues in our department and mentioned that 3 people had been injured that month because of broken equipment. She responded with her usual dramatics comment. When my teammate said it wasn't dramatics and that someone could get seriously hurt, she came out with something that made the whole room go quiet. She said that if someone was going to die, they already would have, right? Then she called us all incompetent. The room went silent. I kept writing, my pen moving faster across the page than usual. I asked about the customer complaints and explained that customers were specifically upset about the new procedures she'd implemented. She told me that maybe customers would like us more if we were more likable. When another teammate tried to jump in and explain that the procedures didn't make sense from the customer's perspective and that we'd gotten feedback about it, she cut them off. She said she didn't want to hear it and told us we didn't deserve our jobs if we couldn't handle simple tasks without whining about everything. That's when something clicked for me. Instead of my usual bullet points, I started writing down every single word. Every insult, every dismissal, every dangerous statement about safety got recorded in my notes, word for word. The meeting dragged on for another hour. She kept insulting our competence, dismissing legitimate safety concerns, and basically telling us that any problems were our fault for not being better employees. I documented every nasty comment, every refusal to take responsibility, every threat about our job security. My job as secretary included distributing meeting notes to the entire company. Usually I'd clean them up a bit, make them professional, but this time I didn't. I typed up every single thing exactly how it had been said. The next morning I printed about 100 copies of the complete transcript and hand-delivered them to every department in the building. I walked from floor to floor, making sure everyone got a copy. Within an hour, things started exploding. People were furious. Employees who had been at the meeting were confirming that yes, she really had said all those things. Departments that had never believed our complaints were suddenly very interested in what we'd been trying to tell them. People from accounting couldn't believe she'd really said someone would already be dead if they were going to die, calling it insane. Employees from marketing were shocked that she'd called us all incompetent and unlikable, saying it was horrible. People were threatening to quit, refusing to do their regular work, openly browsing job sites at their desks. The whole company was in chaos. A few hours later, I got a call from my boss's boss at headquarters. She'd somehow gotten wind of the meeting minutes and wanted to talk. We had a long, off-the-record conversation where I walked her through all the safety issues I'd documented, all the written concerns I'd submitted that had been ignored, and all the records I had of my boss's complete inaction on serious problems. She thanked me for bringing it to her attention and said it was exactly the kind of documentation they needed to address these issues properly. I sent over about 100 pages of documentation I'd accumulated over the months. Every ignored email, every dismissed concern, every record of her refusing to take responsibility for legitimate problems. The next day, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I'd already lined up a new job, and I was done with the toxic environment. Time to move on to better things. Everything seemed to calm down after I left. The company seemed to be trying to smooth things over, and I figured that was the end of it. But then, about a year later, I heard that they hadn't renewed my former boss's contract. That day, I'd gotten my coffee from the station cafe, found my preferred spot, and settled in for the ride. The train was unusually empty, which should have been my first clue that things may get interesting. The doors were about to close when this guy burst through them like he was being chased by wild animals. I'm not exaggerating, he looked absolutely unhinged. His suit was this bizarre combination of colors that didn't match at all. His tie was hanging sideways, and his hair looked like he'd stuck his finger in an electrical socket. But it was his eyes that really got to me. They were darting around the car like a paranoid person in a spy movie. Out of all the empty seats available, he made a beeline straight for me. He told me that he needed my seat because it was reserved for important people. I looked around at the nearly empty car and pointed out that there were plenty of empty seats he could choose from. Instead of taking one of the many available spots, he just plopped down right next to me, practically sitting on top of me. He demanded the window seat, claiming it was his right as a superior being. This was definitely not how I planned to start my Monday. I told him to just take any seat he wanted and leave me alone. He went on about how commoners like me never understood that the world revolved around people like him. He ordered me to shuffle to another seat and not make a fuss about it. I decided the best strategy was to ignore him completely. I put my headphones in and went back to scrolling through my phone, hoping he'd get bored and move away. But this guy wasn't taking the hint. When the train started moving, he leaned over and actually started looking at my phone screen. He asked what I was looking at and called it peasant entertainment. I told him it was just social media and to mind his own business. He sat back and started talking under his breath about society falling apart and how people like me were ruining everything. His voice kept getting louder and louder until other passengers started staring. There was this elderly woman sitting across from us who looked absolutely fed up. The elderly woman asked him to keep it down because some people were trying to enjoy a peaceful journey. The guy turned to her with this look of pure disgust and told her to be quiet. He called her an old woman and said he was on a mission to restore order and that she would witness greatness today. At this point, I started wondering if I was being pranked or if this guy had serious mental health issues. The other passengers were giving each other those looks people share when they're witnessing something completely bizarre. Then things got really weird. This guy suddenly jumped up from his seat and started shouting at the top of his lungs. He announced to everyone that he was taking control of the train and that we should all bow down to our new leader. Everyone just stared in complete shock. I honestly didn't know if this was some kind of performance art or if we were dealing with a genuine crazy person. The train conductor came out of his cabin looking just as confused as the rest of us. The conductor asked what was going on. The guy pointed at me dramatically like I was some kind of criminal and told the conductor that I had insulted him and disrespected his authority. He demanded justice. The conductor looked at me, then back at the guy, clearly not buying any of this nonsense. He explained that this was a public train and that the guy couldn't just hijack it because someone hurt his feelings. He told him to sit down and behave or he would call the authorities. The guy asked how the conductor dared to defy him. He declared himself the chosen one and said he would not tolerate insolence. The elderly woman rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might fall out of her head. The conductor reached for his radio, which was apparently the last straw for our self-appointed train dictator. The guy completely lost it and lunged at the conductor, trying to grab the radio out of his hands. People started screaming and the train shook from all the commotion. This was actually happening on my morning commute. The elderly woman stood up and yelled for him to stop the madness. She started hitting the guy with her handbag, which was probably the most unexpected plot twist of the entire morning. I realized this situation was way beyond just ignoring the problem, so I quietly pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services, while keeping an eye on what was turning into a full-blown brawl between an elderly woman and a delusional man. The guy was now wrestling with the woman over her handbag, while the conductor managed to get on his radio and call for backup. We were told that police would be waiting at the next station. The crazy guy shouted that this was just the beginning and that the world would bow before his greatness. When the train pulled into the station, I could see police officers and security guards waiting on the platform. They stormed onto the train and immediately took control of the situation. The guy tried to resist, but it was pretty pathetic. They got him in handcuffs while he continued ranting about his imagined importance. All the passengers started clapping and laughing from relief. The conductor apologized to everyone and personally thanked me for calling the authorities. When they were dragging him off the train, the guy turned back to me with this wild look in his eyes. He told me that I might have won this battle, but I should mark his words. He would be back and the world would know his name. I had to laugh. What kind of movies had this guy been watching? About a week later, when I was scrolling through local news on my phone, there was a small article about a man who had been arrested for disturbing the peace on public transportation. Apparently, this wasn't his first incident. He'd been doing similar things all over the city, declaring himself the leader of buses, trying to take over subway cars, and generally making a nuisance of himself wherever he went. The article mentioned that he'd been ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation and was banned from public transportation for 6 months. It turned out he'd been off his medication and had been having episodes like this for weeks before someone finally got him the help he needed. I actually felt a little bad for him after reading that, but I was mostly just grateful that my peaceful morning commute could go back to normal. Though I have to admit, every time I get on that train now, I check to make sure there aren't any disheveled men in mismatched sweats looking for their throne. My job involves data analysis for a mid-sized logistics firm. I drive about 20 minutes into town for most things, but I usually hit the first grocery store right when you come into town limits. It's convenient, I know the layout, and I can get in and out without much fuss. This past summer, they opened a new grocery store downtown. I went to the grand opening mostly out of curiosity, but it's just too far out of my way for regular shopping. Plus, I'm pretty set in my routines. When you've got mild hearing loss running in the family and you're already dreading the day you'll need hearing aids, you tend to stick with what works. Last Tuesday, I needed to grab a few things after work, and my usual store was packed. Road construction had traffic backed up for miles, so I figured I'd try the new downtown location. Big mistake. I threw on my usual after-work clothes, black dress pants that were getting pretty ratty at the bottom, because I never get around to hemming them, and my black fleece jacket with the company logo on front. Nothing fancy, just comfortable clothes for a quick grocery run. When I shop, I get laser focused on what I'm doing. I make my list, stick to my budget, and try to get out as fast as possible. I was in the frozen food section doing my usual thing. You know how some people move their hands when they're thinking through math problems? That's me. I use the air like it's paper, working through numbers and comparing prices. I was standing there figuring out whether the family pack of frozen chicken was worth it when I heard a quiet "hey" from somewhere behind me. It sounded pretty far away, and anyone who knows me knows they need to speak up or use my name to get my attention. So I kept doing my calculations. A few seconds later came a more frustrated, "Excuse me." I remember thinking to myself that whoever was making that noise should just get help from someone else so I could shop in peace. I was already in a bad mood from the traffic mess, and little things were setting me off. Then someone grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked. I spun around fast, shaking off whoever had grabbed me, and found myself staring at this woman's chest. She was tall, I'm pushing 5'8", and she had a good 6 inches on me. When I looked up to meet her eyes, she was staring at me like I'd just kicked her dog. This woman was definitely dressed for summer weather, denim shorts, a bikini top that left nothing to the imagination, and a white shirt so thin it might as well have been tissue paper. The shirt wasn't even buttoned. She started screaming at me about how incredibly rude I was for ignoring her when she was trying to get my attention. Then she accused me of staring at her breasts and threatened to report me for it. I was so caught off guard by the whole situation. Here I am, just trying to buy groceries, and this stranger is screaming at me about something I didn't even realize was happening. She kept going on about needing help finding some product, but her condescending tone made it impossible to focus on what she was actually saying. My anger was building with every word. Finally, I'd had enough and told her in very clear terms that I didn't work there and to leave me alone. I started to walk away, but then she did something I never expected. She grabbed my jacket with both hands, lifted me clean off the ground, and slammed me back against one of the freezer doors. My feet were dangling in the air, and suddenly all that anger just drained away. I was genuinely scared. She held me there, screaming in my face about what a pathetic piece of garbage I was. She threatened to get me fired and charged with sexual harassment. Then she started calling me names, saying I was fat and would die alone because nobody could ever want someone like me. She held me there for what felt like forever, just screaming. Then suddenly she backed up and dropped me. I didn't land well. My legs got tangled up and I went down hard, my shoulders taking most of the impact when I tried to control the fall. That's when I saw why she'd let go so fast. An employee had come around the corner with a pallet jack and was staring at the whole scene in shock. The young employee asked if I was okay and wanted to know what was going on. I picked myself up, my shoulders aching, and pointed toward Karen, who was already trying to escape around the other end of the aisle. I told the employee that woman had just assaulted me and asked her to call the police. The employee's eyes went wide and she told me to stay put before sprinting toward the front of the store. But I'm stubborn, and I wasn't about to just stand there in the frozen food section. I made my way slowly toward the front, hearing all kinds of commotion ahead of me. By the time I got there, the manager had positioned himself in front of the exit doors, which were apparently locked shut. Karen was trapped, and she was not happy about it. Several customers had gathered around to see if I was okay, which I appreciated. That's when Karen decided to double down on her story. She started yelling about how I was a disgusting pig who had been trying to look at her breasts. She claimed I was the real problem and that I was just faking being hurt. The manager stepped forward and told her that the police could review the security footage to see exactly what had happened. I watched all the color drain from Karen's face in real time. Everyone in that store could see she knew she was caught. About 15 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. They spent the next 30 minutes taking statements, asking questions, and reviewing the security footage. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate and told them absolutely. They arrested Karen right there in the store. When they were walking her out in handcuffs, she was still trying to claim she was the real victim. Nobody was buying it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.